Luckily, it wasn't too long into the election.
Well, all I've talked about is just the lead up to it. So we got the G1, the S, and now we have double the amount of DNA. Does everybody see why most specialized cells never leave G1? Because there would be no point in doubling the amount of DNA if you're not going to divide, is there? You don't need that extra copy. Once we move through the S phase, we now enter growth 2, the G2 phase. This is the final preparation for division. The final preparations for cell division. Are we big enough? Check. Do we have enough protein? Check. Do we have enough energy? Check. Is the DNA doubled? Check. Do we need another cell? Check. See how we're going down the list? It literally is going through that checklist. If it stops and says, no, we don't have enough energy, then we're going to have to halt the process until we make more ATP. No, we don't have enough protein, we're going to have to halt the process until we make enough. That is a key point. I want to make sure everybody understands that. It's the final preparations for the goal order. Once you move into M phase, this is called mitosis. Mitosis. That is now a non-stop process. We have two options. We divide or we die. And believe it or not, those are the only options. I have seen several cases of cells that do die because they don't have the resources and they've moved on. Yes, sir.
If a cell starts this process and something goes wrong, is that cell permanently, does it keep compounding and getting worse, or can it?
Yes,
Okay,
we're getting there.
okay.
So, Ned's question. If a cell that is not supposed to divide goes ahead and divides, is that a problem? Yes, it is. Because what we have done is two things. Number one, we have pushed the accelerator to the floor. And number two, we've disconnected the brakes. We are in for a short, fast, fun ride, aren't we? Maybe not fun. This leads us to uncontrolled cell growth or uncontrolled cell division. There is a technical term for that. Does anybody know what that term is?
Cancer.
Cancer. Believe it or not, we want our cells to stop dividing. I've got a little 10-year-old niece. I'll get to see her once or twice a week. And I swear every time that kid comes in my house, she's an inch tall. She's growing like a weed. But you'd expect a 10-year-old child to be growing like that, wouldn't you? We want her cells to continue dividing, don't we? Because that's normal growth and development. If she keeps going, she might get my height. That's kind of scary. Do I want my cells to still be growing like that? I already told you the world is not made for left-handed people over 6 feet tall, especially those who have a bad back. If I were to grow and be 7 feet tall, I'm going to be asking for more difficulty, right? Anybody in here know who Andre the Giant was? You seen The Princess Bride? He played the big guy. Huge man. He had a tumor in his pituitary gland, which meant he kept producing growth hormone past the time he should have stopped, which made him a very big man, a giant. Gigantus.
Hyperplasia.
Huh?
You may call it hyperplasia.
Yeah, there's different kinds. We're not gonna get into technical terms. But the bottom line was, while it gave him certain physical advantages as a wrestler, it also meant a shorter lifespan. The world's tallest man hit 8 feet 11 inches. He also had a tumor. That's almost 9 feet tall. I'm 6 feet. Imagine sticking another half of me on top of me. Great, he got this name in the world's record, but he only lived at age 22. You start to see why this is not a good idea to keep growing. Now, what we really want, and this is the term I want to get you down, want you to get down, is regulation.
Regulation.
Would I want to turn my growth genes back on? Well, if I broke my arm, yes, I would, wouldn't I? I would want to make some bone cells to replace those in the bone and repair the break, wouldn't I? I want to flick it back on. I want to make just enough and then turn it back off. I don't want to be growing a bone tumor, do I? Cut your arm. You want to be growing back some skin. You don't want it to become a tumor. You see how this goes. The key point there is regulation. Regulation. If the regulatory system gets messed up, then things that shouldn't grow start to grow. And I'll give you guys a moment to get caught up. I'm getting a little fired up here. I'm getting excited. It's like, yeah, you need to slow down. Man, t-shirt again.
The regulatory system gets messed up.
Huh?
What did you say if the regulatory system gets messed up?
You got cancer. Growth. We as humans do not have the regulatory system figured out. We have an idea how it works, but we can't just go in and flick things on and turn them back off. If we could, oh, that would be nice. Well, yeah. If you cut your finger off, wouldn't it be nice to grow a new finger? More realistically, people who have had their spinal cord severed or paralyzed from the sever down, wouldn't it be nice to grow a few more neurons to bypass that break and have spinal cord function again? There's some real potential there, isn't there? You got a damaged liver or kidney, wouldn't it be able to grow a new one? Be awesome.
Yeah.
Self-transplant, that would be awesome, wouldn't it? There's a lot of potential there, folks. There's also a lot of danger.
I would say usually in transplants, don't they keep like the kidney or whatever still in there? Like if you was to have a kidney
It
transplant?
depends on if it's necrotic or not. And it depends on the source of the donor. There's so many things we go in there.
Considerations.
When I was your age, I dated a young lady who had had a liver transplant the year before. She's probably the single most disciplined person I ever knew. She had to take an immunosuppressive drug every 6 hours. And you talk about discipline. She carried an alarm with her, and it was set for every 6 hours, and it didn't matter where she was at or what she was doing. When her beeper went off, she gave herself her medication. You've never had a fun time until you've been with your date and you bring her home for church and her beeper goes off and she starts shooting up in the middle of the pastor's sermon. You've certainly got some explaining to do then. Hey, but I admire her. They said she'd be lucky if she lived past 30. She's my age, we're both 55, she's still around and kicking. Got 4 kids, doing well. Amazed at her resilience or discipline. But y'all let me get down a rabbit trail. You know, quit laughing at me.
So you're gonna talk about stem cells?
I'm getting there. You want to hit orbit, I'm still saying we're on the first stage of the rocket. Let's ride it up, not blow it up. Yeah, we will talk about stem cells. Let's do cancer first, though. Does everybody see how this goes? There are a lot of therapeutic potentials here, but there's a big, big danger as well. Cancer itself, let's talk about that. It consists of 4 stages. Now, we're just going to paint with a fairly broad brush here. And by that I mean, we're not going to get lost in the weeds or hung up on the details. So you might know more about it than I'm bringing into the class discussion. You might have heard something that's a little different. That's fine. We're just getting an idea of the big picture here. Stage 1 is abnormal cell division or abnormal cell growth. That's stage 1. One cell becomes 2. 2 become 4. 4 become 8. You get the idea. Y'all ever seen those old Bugs Bunny cartoons where he's at the top of the mountain and he rolls a little snowball down? By the time it hits the bottom, it's a big snowball, isn't it? Swallows the coyote or Yosemite Sam or one of those people. Cancer is very much like that. Stage 1, it's not really a problem. It just means you've got something going on where you should. It doesn't mean it's fast. It can be, it may not be. It just means you now have abnormal cell growth. Is everyone clear on that? Stage 2, sometimes called tumorogenesis. It's the formation of a tumor. Tumorogenesis or tumor formation, something like that. And it's literally what it sounds like. At stage 2, the cancer has gotten big enough to be detectable, symptomatic, might be causing issues. Now, that doesn't mean you're likely to die from it at stage 2. It doesn't mean it's necessarily having a major effect. As with so many different things, there's a lot to consider, right? Where is the tumor? What tissue did it arise from? How fast is it growing? All these are just factors. See that scar there? I had a stage 2 tumor there that I was able to detect because I noticed a bump underneath my skin that hadn't been there, and it was getting larger. Didn't cause me any pain. There wasn't any discoloration. It wasn't even visible. It's just something I noticed because I felt it. Went and had a biopsy done. Doc says, well, we're going to have to do a biopsy, which is they basically cut you open, take a little sample of it to look at it and see what it is. He said, but since it's so small, when I'm biopsying it, if I make it cut a little bit bigger, I can take the whole thing out. I said, sure. Went down to Whitley City on one afternoon. He numbed me up local. He and I talked. I actually watched him do it. It's kind of cool. Obviously, not any further problem with it. That was over 30 years ago. Good outcome, right? I'll take it. Gives me a little scar and a cool story for my students. That's stage 2. Stage 3 is where you start to get worried. I call this invasion. Invasion. At stage 3, it has moved beyond the original tissue. Now, it's not moved throughout the body, But you can imagine if I had a big knot here that was about this big and sticking out like that and has cracked skin and would break open and bleed every time I flex my arm. That's gonna be causing me some trouble, isn't it? At this point, it has moved into the surrounding tissue. It's invaded it. And it's most likely going to be causing some kind of issue. Pain, bleeding, it'll look wrong, muscle weakness, nausea, depending on where it is. At this point, it's definitely a health concern. Which leads us to stage 4. The technical term for stage 4 is metastasis. Metastasis. M-E-T-A-S-T-A-S-I-S. Metastasis. When you hear that cancer has metastasized, it's at stage 4.
Spread.
Huh?
I said spread.
Yes, it spreads. What happens, the tumor literally fragments. Little bits and pieces and chunks of it break off. They're carried throughout the blood. So I've got this big thing on my arm, but little pieces of it have been broken off and they've been carried to my left kidney, my right lung, my brain, my liver. Where do I have tumors now?
Everywhere.
Everywhere.
Everywhere. Another good term for this would be systemic. It's now systemic. It's found throughout the body. What's the next step?
Yeah.
Death.
When you're talking about like the tumors or whatever, like at stage 1, when does it like either malignant or benign? How does that factor in here?
Location, tissue of origin, rate of growth. It's more or less arbitrary. This was considered benign.
Mhm.
As Doc said, no more than it's growing. We could probably wait 20 years before we take it out and deal with it. It's now been about 35 years, I think, since I had that. It would probably now be about this big, but it still would not be causing me any trouble at all. Because it was a lipoma, which is a fatty tissue. I have an unsolid bump. That's it. It's not material that's going to break off or circulate. It's not invading the surrounding tissue. Technically benign. That's more of a judgment call that the doctor makes. Is this going to cause my patient further risk of damage and death if left untreated?
So if it's very slowly growing, can it change?
Okay, yeah. Because anytime you have changed the regulation of it, it could change again. We'll talk more about that when we get into genetics. But I don't want to get hung up on that. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Do you have a question?
I did. Could one say cancer is like a crime, like every instance of it is different? Because you hear, like in your case, you would have been fined for X number of years, and then some people figure out about it in 1 month and then they're dead the next.
Yep. In fact, we're going to talk about treatment. What's best treatment for cancer in general? Somebody raise their hand if they wish to try.
I mean, you have radiation therapy, chemo,
Radiation and chemo are options, but they're not the best.
surgery.
Surgery is generally considered the preferred. Why? Well, once you cut it out, is it going to continue growing? That little chunk of me was removed 35 years ago, it's no longer a factor for anybody.
I mean, unless they just didn't get the whole thing.
Unless they didn't get the whole thing.
Yeah.
Surgery may or may not be an option. For me, obviously, it was no big deal. I mean, it didn't knock me out, it was just a couple shots to local numbness. It's like, okay, you may go into medicine someday, you wanna watch? This is cool. Sure. I'll let you slice and dice me while I'm giving you running commentary. I mean, basically, that's what it was. The key here is detection. Detection. That's the number one factor that determines whether or not you will survive. Detection. I see one person, two people writing that down. Which is better, early or late?
Early.
Early. I know one person who ended up getting a little tumor at the tip of her nose. Didn't bother to get it checked. Finally realized it was going to not go away, and it had gotten bigger, and went and got it checked. It was stage 2 melanoma. So the surgery was a little bit more extensive than just scrape. It was more like scoop. So she ended up having this little, I hate to say it, a crater at the end of her nose. Because what they had to do is something called clearing the margins. Clearing the margins. Let's say that this represents a patch of skin I'm going to remove. And the cancer is right here in the middle. I'm going to remove some of the good tissue around it, right? Both above and below. Because I want to make sure that I get all the cancer. Now, in my case, you can see the tumor. He showed me where it was. He showed me why I was cutting here. It was cool. I'm such a nerd. Cleared the margins, no big deal. My friend ended up having to get a little bit of reconstruction. As I told her, even if she hadn't gotten the reconstruction, better to have a little crater at the end of your nose than to be dead. Or worse, not worse. Or have to lose your nose and have it rebuilt entirely. Surgery is not always an option. A tumor deep in the brain, is that something you're going to be able to just, yeah, let's crack that skull, carve that brain in half and scoop it out?
That's the 60s, they would have tried.
You got some issues. That is a case where they would probably use radiation. What they do with radiation is they focus onto one particular spot. They literally will lock you into a framework and they shoot gamma rays or X-rays or both, depending on what it is, onto a very, very small area to kill everything in that area without damaging the surrounding tissue. Sometimes called a gamma knife because it's that accurate. You can get down to the micrometer level, which is submillimeters, if you have enough of a source and enough of an image of where it is. The other time where you would use radiation, put your phone up, please. If you need to text somebody, I just ask that you go outside to do it. The other time you use it is if it is something that one organ absorbs preferentially. One organ will absorb preferentially. The thyroid, for example, the gland located right here, kind of a U shape right around the esophagus and trachea. It absorbs iodine. I knew somebody had a tumor in their thyroid. They treated it with radioactive iodine. The iodine was taken up by the body, went right to there, effectively destroyed the tumor in that part of the thyroid. The rest of it got eliminated by their body. Pretty cool treatment. And then there is the last option. This is the only systemic option. Very often, they will do this in conjunction with surgery or radiation. It's a precaution in those cases, especially if it's only stage 2. But if they think you're at stage 3 or 4, they will almost certainly do this even if they do surgery to remove the tumor. And that is chemotherapy. Chemotherapy. If there has ever been a procedure that has been misnamed, I think it is this. Chemotherapy is just a fancy word for poisoning the body. They're not injecting you with drugs, they're injecting you with poison. And the hope and the idea is that the poison will kill off all of the bad cells, the cancer cells. Yes, ma'am.
Is that why people going through chemotherapy get so sick?
Yeah, I was just getting ready to go there. Y'all are asking some great questions. Just getting ahead of me.
In turn of killing the bad cells, they're also killing the good cells.
Right. What they think about the most common side effects of chemo. One of them, you get very nauseous and sick, diarrhea, throwing up. What's the other one?
Hair loss.
Hair loss. The hair follicles are some of the fastest dividing cells in the body. The same with the epithelial cells that line the digestive system. The chemo drugs target fast dividing cells. Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? Because cancer is typically fast dividing. But those chemo drugs can't tell the difference between a tumor and a hair follicle or an epithelial cell.
Is it just your hair on your head, or is it like the rest of your body hair too?
Everything. Stem to stern, as they say.
Eyebrows and all?
Eyebrows and all. Doesn't mean it will necessarily be that case for everyone. It's just it's like so many other things. It's variable on, depends on the type of tumor, the type of drug, the dosage, the frequency.
So, I know that hair loss from chemo is long-term, if not permanent, is nausea also.
Actually, most hair loss to chemo is not permanent. It can be. Taxotere, I think, is very bad for that. It's a breast cancer drug. But generally what happens is you basically go in, you hook yourself up to an IV, they give you the drug. The drug does what it's supposed to do. It attacks those cells and it kills them. You feel horrible for a day or two because you can't keep anything down. Your hair begins to fall out. Is that your only round of chemo? They give you 6 days to recover. You go in next Monday and they do it again. You go in and do that 8 to 12 times, we'll say. Are you going to have any hair growth in that 12-week period?
No.
But after that, they generally, if they have to do multiple runs, they will actually build in a time, maybe 2 or 3 months for you to recover. Because if you take too much of it, too short a time, I mean, you can kill yourself from the side effects. I'm not trying to alarm people, but I want people to understand exactly what it is. There's one particular drug, it's colloquially called the Red Devil. If you're on that, you can't kiss anybody or engage in relations with anybody because you don't want to get any of the chance of your fluids, which sweat the drug out or release it in other ways, contaminating another person. Cancer's pretty serious business, and chemo's pretty serious business. Generally, though, you probably have to be stage 3 or 4 before they'll do it, or they have to detect it elsewhere. It's not something they make a light decision on. I know you're coming. I think Nick had his hand up first.
Could you do a blood transfusion to replace the damaged good cells?
like leukemia. Oh, you guys are good. Leukemia bypasses the whole thing. Y'all want to hear this treatment? Anybody in here ever heard of bone marrow?
Yeah.
The long bones contain bone marrow, which is where the stem cells for blood are. That's where the red blood cells get made. It's where the white blood cells get made. Leukemia is basically blood cancer. What they do with that is they hit the long bones with a blast of intense radiation to kill off all of the bone marrow. To wipe it out, gone completely. Does the cancer go with it? But you wiped out their immune system, haven't you? Well, this is the cool thing about a bone marrow transfusion. I go to my brother and say, hey, bro, don't you love me? We grew up together. Yeah, sure. Well, why don't you go in there and let that doctor stick this big horse needle right through your muscles, right through your bone, and draw up this thing of bone marrow. I'm being a little snarky because it's not something you do just out of the goodness of your heart, probably. It's a pretty rough procedure to harvest the bone marrow. But once they do that, assuming you're compatible, they put that bone marrow into your long bones. It reboots the immune system, starts producing new white blood cells and red blood cells. Pretty cool. If you get anemic from the treatment, they may give you a blood transfusion just to get your iron levels back up, which can help a lot with energy and things like that. And you had a question. What's your name again?
Kaylee,
Kaylee. I'm just trying to learn. Thanks, Kaylee.
that's okay. Can you just repeat the cells of the digestive system you said?
Epithelial cells,
Yes, thank you.
the epithelium being the outer layer. We think of the epithelium as being the skin, right? But it actually also lines the inside of the gut. So your esophagus, your stomach, small and large intestine.
What are the requirements like for a bone marrow match? I mean, what does it have to do with?
The immune system basically works on a principle of recognition. Okay? There are three ways this goes. When the immune system comes into contact with something from outside the body, it is going to recognize it as self, meaning it belongs. It's going to recognize it as non-self, meaning it's foreign and we're going to attack it, right? Or it's not going to be able to recognize it at all. So if I got a joint replaced, they would put, I think it's titanium is what they use. That's a metal that the immune system doesn't even recognize as anything there. If it hits that metal, it just bounces right off. I have type O blood. That means my blood cells do not have the recognition protein that someone else's does. Does anybody else know their blood type?
Yeah.
A positive.
A positive? Okay.
A positive.
So you're A positive, I'm O negative. Could I donate blood to Travis?
Yes.
Yes, because my cells, once they get in his body, the immune system doesn't recognize them at all. It's like stealth blood, isn't it? However, if we took some of Travis's blood and injected it into me, probably, who said I did? You're just a barrel of that. Probably would be though, because my cells, my white blood cells are circulating, right? As soon as they encounter one of those red blood cells, are they going to recognize it as self? They're going to see it as non-self, aren't they? And they're going to initiate an immune response, which could kill me.
Yeah.
So back to the bone marrow. I have a full blood brother. Chances would be higher that he and I would be compatible than, say, me and Ben. I don't know anything about your ancestry. I don't know anything about you except you're here in my class. Do my brother and I share genetic makeup? Yeah, we're about 25% identical genetic makeup. So it'd be more likely we could take blood out of him, put it in mine, and any leftover remnants of my immune system wouldn't react to it.
How do they check for that?
They look for those markers, immune markers. They're called antigens, A-N-T-I-G-E-N. An antigen is just a marker on any cell. It's a marker on any cell. The immune system uses those to recognize as belonging or not belonging. Like the COVID vaccine, when they injected that messenger RNA vaccine, y'all heard of that one? What happened was the messenger RNA stimulated your cells to make COVID protein. Does your body recognize as COVID protein as belonging? It's non-self, right? So it starts making what we call antibodies, which are proteins that bind to that. That way, if you ever get infected with COVID, it binds to the virus. That help? I think I saw,
Could you like have a general idea of what your blood type is from like your parents or no? You have to.
you can. A lot of it depends on your knowledge of genetics and your knowledge of your ancestry. And by that, I mean, if I had both your grandparents and your parents, I could probably use your blood type, because I'm a geneticist. We'll talk about that when we get to genetics. If you really are interested, hang around after class. I just don't want to muddy the water, so I'm throwing that out there. Yes, sir.
Okay, so this backtracks to bone marrow. I know that high levels of radiation kill bone marrow. So whenever you get radiation treatment for cancer, is it just so precise that you don't have to worry about it killing your bone marrow, or is the radiation level not high? I watched Chernobyl the other night, and they were having to throw them on
Is
radiation.
chemotherapy good for your body?
No.
Is cancer good for your body?
No.
Which is bigger danger? Most of us would say cancer because we don't control it, do we? Do we control the timing of the chemo?
Yeah.
Do we control the dosage of the chemo?
Yeah.
Do we control what specific drug we put in the chemo?
Yeah.
It's called a risk-reward assessment. There's a risk and there's a reward for everything. What happens there is they hope that the damage and bad they do to your body with the radiation is outweighed by the good of eliminating cancer. When I was in the hospital with my spinal infection, they did chest x-rays on me every 3 days. Now, if you know anything about a chest x-ray, they try not to do them unless they absolutely have to. If you are in medical field at all and you know anything about being bedridden for 5 weeks, you know that your patient is at a high risk for pneumonia, fluid buildup in the lungs. Small chance of increased cancer risk because of chest x-ray, high risk of pneumonia on an immunocompromised patient. Which do you do? Chest x-ray. You have a patient who's in there because they have a broken leg and they can't get around, are you going to be doing chest x-rays on them every day? No need. Everybody see how this goes? Which brings us to yet another thing, cancer risk. Who in this room has the biggest risk of cancer? There's one person who's at higher risk than everybody.
Female.
Me?
Female.
No, it's me.
Oh, yeah.
Why?
Already
had cancer.
I've already had cancer. Somebody else back there said, you're old. You're right. Both in that I am old, and that is why I am a higher risk. Age is the number one risk factor for cancer. Everything else being equal, who will I pick up? Reagan looks like a lot of target. You're around 18, 19, 20. You don't have to tell me your age, but roughly there. 19. I'm 55. So I'm basically 2.5 times your age. Would you agree with that? Who's had more chances to get zapped by solar radiation, me or her? Who's probably had more x-rays? Who's been exposed to more secondhand tobacco smoke in their life? Now that is a smoker. You see where I'm going with this, right? That's what it is. It's just a simple fact of environmental exposure. Other risk factors, genetics, and I'm gonna just put this all under lifestyle. I'm more of a risk than the average person my age, simply because of the nature of my job. If I asked how many of you have worked with radioactive material in your life, gee, I wonder why mine is the only hand going up.
I've been around those plates.
Been around those plates, uranium glass plates, but you've not worked with it.
Use the microwave.
You've used the microwave. See what I'm saying? Who's going to have a higher risk for skin cancer? Somebody who lives in Los Angeles, California, or somebody who lives in Narvik, Norway. California, because you get more sunny days there.
I was thinking of the smog and all that.
I don't know
You ever
why.
been to Narvik?
No.
Consider yourself fortunate.
I don't know why anyone lives in Australia anymore.
You don't know why anybody lives in Australia anymore. Because they're tough, man.
Yeah.
Of the 10 most venomous animals in the world, I think 9 of them are in Australia.
They got them big spiders too.
Yeah.
That's a no.
My friend from down under says, it's awesome, mate, to get sharks in the bathtub. just stepping outside your door in Oz, you're putting your life at risk.
Part of the uniforms down there for schools is a big hat if they ever go outside.
It doesn't surprise me. Google drop bears sometime. Koalas. Those things are nasty.
And we all have.
All right, don't let me go down another rabbit path. We'll never get off it. Where were we before you let me start? Lifestyle. How many of you have worked with hazardous chemicals before? Okay, see where it goes? Is anybody in here a smoker and willing to admit it?
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
Smoked for about 25 years.
Congratulations.
Pretty hard to quit.
Congratulations.
Nicotine is more addictive than heroin. Bet y'all didn't know that, did you? Anybody in here ever gone to a tanning bed? Shortwave ultraviolet light, in essence damaging your skin. All of those are what we call lifestyle factors. Eat red meat. Nobody has to raise your hand. I'm just showing you. These are all things that make it more likely. Doesn't mean you're guaranteed to get it if you do all of that. It's all based on probability. People don't really understand probability. They think 1 in a million means if I do it 1,000,000 times, I'll win, right? Wrong. It means each time you do it, there is a 1 in 1,000,000 chance of it occurring. If I only do it once, that's not a very likelihood of it occurring, is it? If I do it every day, I'm increasing the odds. See how it goes? I hadn't had a wreck in probably 25 years, but I've always been in the habit of buckling my seatbelt. Every time I got out and drove, I buckled my seatbelt. Did it have any effect on my health at all? Because I didn't have a wreck. 2 years ago on the way home, some expletive deleted pulled out in front of me, totaled my truck. Had to call my mom, my uncle for a ride. They came up. Mom saw the truck before she saw me. She burst into tears. And then she saw me standing over there on the side of the road, completely unharmed. Despite the fact that the hood of my Toyota Tacoma had been mashed back towards the cab and was about this wide. Because I had my belt on. See what I mean? Just habit, the fact that I do it, so saved my life that day. I didn't get bruised. Worst thing about that was the smell of the gunpowder charge that set off the airbag. boom in my face. I was like, what? Somebody fired a gun? What happened? That literally was what I thought. This is why whenever you're doing something, it's generally considered your own decision whether or not you smoke or eat red meat or go. Because at the end of the day, we have responsibility for our health choices. I'm not gonna lie, I like a good steak. I like hamburgers. Now, I'm not heading down to Wendy's every day and getting myself a Baconator. But I'm not gonna say that I drive past Wendy's on my way home every day and don't stop and get myself a double. I do on occasion. Does that increase my likelihood of colon cancer? Yes, it does. Did you realize that? Red meat, isn't it? I choose to have an acceptably higher risk of colon cancer because I get pleasure from eating that double cheese.
Isn't
where
that
I'm going
whole
with this?
risk reward thing where they say, some people say that red meat's good for you, others say, like you just said, it can cause colon cancer.
The only reason I'm telling you this is so you're making an informed decision.
How does red meat, like,
Huh?
how does red meat, like, heighten your chances of getting colon cancer?
Cooking alters the chemical composition of it, and as it passes through your colon, I mean, how long does it stay in there? A few hours to a few days, depending on your, what else you've eaten in your health. While those chemicals are present in the large intestine, they can act as what we call a mutagen or a carcinogen and change the DNA of those cells. If they change the DNA sufficiently, what's going to happen is those cells, which should normally divide quickly and be passed out, may just get locked on and start divide. That answer? Yes, ma'am.
What's like, okay, so I live on a farm, so all of our meat is like fresh. We don't eat meat from like other like restaurants and stuff, because we've always had like a, you know, like a thing like, is it really meat or whatever? So like, is that applied just to like natural like beef? Because we get our, like we slaughter our own, you know, our animals, we package them, we know that there's no like.
Basically, organic
Right.
versus commercial.
Mhm.
Well, I do know this, most commercially graded meat has hormones added, or not hormones, but antibiotics added to it, which, you know, antibiotics are substances that kill bacteria, right? They are generally from a natural origin, but they're not a natural part of meat. Anytime you put something into your body, does it have the potential to do something to it? Sure. They also probably have hormones injected into them, because if you're a commercial farmer, you want to sell more meat, right? Because you get paid by the pound. And again, risk reward. You have to be involved in all of the labor of raising the livestock, processing it, butchering it. That's a very tedious, difficult job. But I definitely know, I've had fresh.
Yeah.
There's a definite benefit in taste. I think there probably is a health benefit. How much quantifiable that is, I couldn't say. On the cancer front, I wouldn't say it's as likely as some other things. But I would never ever knock anybody for saying, I prefer organic beef. It may cost you more. If you're willing to pay for it and you can afford it, I think that's fine.
If you ate,
Good
let's
question.
say, a deer, is it commercial beef or like wild, like game?
Same principle. People get hung up on natural. Well, natural doesn't mean better. I would never, under any circumstances whatsoever, short of starvation, and I do mean literally I'd have to be starving. This would be the only time I would ever eat this, and that's wild boar.
Why?
Who said that? Why?
Well,
What do pigs eat?
Everything.
everything.
Yes.
So pigs, especially feral pigs, wild pigs, are almost always massively infected by parasites. Trichinosis, anyone?
Same thing with bears.
Huh?
Same thing with bears.
Same thing with bears. It's a reason I don't do sushi, because if you knew some of the parasites in fish, no way would I eat fish bait.
Isn't sushi the highest cause of tapeworms?
Probably so. You're just dying to speak up.
Sorry.
I'm teasing you, man. These are all good questions. That's why I'm letting you ask them. Good.
I heard that back in the day, like in settler times, there was a group like in like North Carolina area where people would actually lose their nose from a certain thing they ate from wild boar because they and it,
I have no idea what you're talking about.
and it was that they didn't cook the pork all the way.
I have no idea what you're
There's
talking
some
about.
kind of thing where it actually would eat the cartilage of the nose.
I've heard that if you smoke certain dried plants, it will induce a state akin to euphoria, but I've never experienced that.
I didn't know if you knew anything about
No,
that. Okay.
I don't
heard
know about that one.
but-
Look up specifics. Question.
So with beef, would it help like if you cook the beef like all the way?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So it has a big difference on the way you cook it too.
Yeah. If you cook it to a certain temperature for a certain length of time, it's guaranteed to pretty much kill anything that's in it. But now you're taking it back to what you were asking about with the higher risk of intestinal cancer. It's all a choice, is what it comes down to. Anything you do can get you killed, including doing nothing.
You're gonna die one way or another.
Bingo. We're all operating under a death sentence. And I'm not trying to be morbid. I'm just saying, if somebody comes up to me and says, I like a cigarette once in a while, I don't. I would ask that you don't do it around me because I just don't like the smell. But if you want to do it, are you paying for it? Are you putting anybody else in danger by standing out there in the fresh air doing it? That's a choice that you're making. It's one you should be free to make, in my opinion. As a biologist, I'm not going to, oh man, you need to quit smoking while I'm standing out here, Mr. Pale Skin, under the sunlight.
Yeah.
Seriously. I'm not going to criticize somebody going to a tanning bed any more than I'm going to tell somebody you ought to put sunscreen on. My niece, oh yeah, I'm going to tell her she put sunscreen on. She's 10 years old and she's a ginger.
Oh yeah.
But if she decided at 19 she wanted to go to the tanning bed, it's her choice. I think we've lost a lot of respect in the community, unfortunately. Good questions. Any others?
I'm popping my fingers out.
Okay, you're popping your fingers. With you, I never know.
I've read a book about the different blood types and what kind of food they will eat specifically on every type of blood type. Like, you know, it matters if, for example, I'm A positive. So the red meats are okay, but you can eat it.
There's a lot of books out there
Something
that
like
are
that.
based on what I call pseudoscience. And pseudoscience is not science, is it? Remember what I said about following the scientific method? Well, you asked a great question about comparing organic versus processed. I have not really seen any clinical evidence that says processed foods are healthier or organic foods are healthier. Based on my personal experience, I will definitely say I have a preference for certain organic foods. That alone is sufficient for me. If, let's say you like sushi. Based on my knowledge, I'm never going to buy sushi. If you went out and got yourself California roll, I say knock yourself out and enjoy.
California roll like sushi.
Well, see what I mean?
Yeah.
It's anybody at that point. We just don't have science to say.
So that's pseudoscience.
Most of it probably is. And I want to emphasize, anecdotal evidence is not scientific evidence. Does everybody know what I mean by that?
one-off stuff.
Well, just because it was colder 30 years ago doesn't mean that the average global temperature was lower. Everybody see that? If we measured the average global temperature every year on the same day, at the same time, in the same location over 30 years, and we graphed it and saw that, well, that is evidence, isn't it? Not me saying, well, I remember back when I was in third grade, back in the mid-70s, we didn't go to school in the entire month of January, which is true. That doesn't mean it was any colder overall then than it is today. It doesn't mean it's any warmer then. It just means that particular year we had a rough January. A lot of things get reported in the news and they get lost in translation. Whatever your preferred news source, I will say this. I don't think many of them are objective anymore. I think most news sources have an agenda, if nothing else, a bias. Do I have a bias? Can't help it. It's part of being a person. I was raised in the state of Tennessee. I've lived pretty much my whole life in the state of Tennessee. I guess you've been from Kentucky all your life.
I actually come from Virginia originally.
Everybody here a Kentucky native? Do you like basketball? Is basketball objectively better than football?
No.
Not objectively worse than football, is it? It's a sport you prefer. I prefer football. Well, what's the statewide sport in Tennessee? It's not basketball. It may be becoming basketball, but historically it's been football, right? I didn't play basketball growing up. I played football. Do I have a bias or a preference? Absolutely. Both in terms of sports teams that I'm a fan of and in sport that I prefer to watch and enjoy. Doesn't make me any better than you, doesn't make me any worse than you. But you know, if you start talking with me from the get-go, I'm probably not going to be as much of a favorite of the Wildcats as you are. Speaking of which, didn't they lose to Vanderbilt?
Yeah, we lost to Auburn, so.
Oh, that's right. You also lost to Vandy. Oh, yeah. Anytime the Braves win, I have to brag because they do it so rarely. Y'all want to hear a bad joke? Locking the Vanderbilt football team and not use the web. Can't put together 3 W's in a row.
That's true.
Anyway. Not letting me get far afield.
We were on blood times.
Blood times. Whenever you hear something like that, Pam, I would want to see the source. So I could see what their claims are, what their evidence is. Like you were saying with the thing where your nose falls off.
Yeah.
You may very well have read that. You may misremember that.
Yeah.
You may have heard it secondhand.
Yeah, I think I did hear something.
That doesn't mean you're spreading falsehoods. It means you heard something, somebody said it sounded vaguely cool, you halfway heard it, and it's 5 years ago and you're repeating it now because you got reminded of it. Y'all ever played that game telephone growing up? I whisper something over here, by the time it gets back over here, it's completely garbled. So much of that happens with information. Science attempts to minimize bias. If you get nothing else out of today's lecture, I want you to understand that. If you come up to me and say, well, I feel that fresh farm meat is better than commercial meat, is that a scientific statement? But it's a valid one, because that's what you feel. You're not coming to me saying, well, I have scientific evidence that my diet is healthier than yours. I'm not going to her and saying, well, my highly processed diet is healthier than yours. You see the difference? It's okay for me to say I believe, it's okay for me to say I feel, but I'm not trying to back it up with some kind of evidence-based thing. And I'm not trying to distract you from saying this, but I want to be very careful before we start opening up that can of worms. One thing that I hope every one of you get from this class It's not something that people do much anymore. Have you ever heard the term critical thinking?
Yeah.
What it means is you look at a statement and you learn to say, is this really what they're saying? Is this really what it is? Do you believe in a 65-mile-an-hour speed limit?
What's posted?
Is that, do you believe it?
No.
This man would willingly send thousands of your loved ones to a mangled, fiery death just so he can get to his liquor store quicker and buy a beer. Well, that's an inflammatory statement. That's what the news sounds like. What they should do is say a 65-mile-an-hour speed limit versus a 75-mile-an-hour speed limit. Statistically has shown fewer deaths in auto accidents. Is that a good, valid scientific statement?
Yeah.
But I won't lie, there are certain stretches on 27 South, when I hit them, especially like I will be in about 5 or 10 minutes, I ain't gonna be doing 55. Now, I'm not gonna be doing 85, but I might be up in that 60s.
Somewhere in the middle.
Somewhere in the middle, yeah. Is that a conscious choice?
It's
I
your
take it,
choice.
It's my choice, yeah. Would anybody feel like you didn't get your money's worth if I let you go 2 whole minutes early? Oh, no, you paid for my time and you paid quite well. If you go and look at the salary or the tuition dollars that you paid, you divide it by total number of minutes that you had. Wow. Multiply that. I don't know all of it. Thank you all. I will see you Wednesday. Have a good couple of days. Appreciate all the good questions.
I have a question. We have to work. I've been checking that calendar, I just haven't seen anything. Oh,
Did you get some?
I did.
You couldn't know for your life? Why is it amazing?
Now why?
Now, what were you saying?
I can't open the YouTube. I tried to find, I can't